When I did my book tour back in May, I did Denver. I'd stop in Denver, and I was shocked at the amount of homeless people there.
Yes.
Like you expect it in Seattle, you expect it in San Francisco and Portland, et cetera. But I was shocked by what was going on in Denver, which is such a gorgeous city, and the
Yes.
people are great and all that. So what is going on in Denver?
So homelessness is on the rise, and you will never guess what Lauren Boebert is going to blame for this.
Democrats. So, I mean, really, that's what happened. We had universal mail-in ballots about 10 years ago go through, and Democrats started taking over every single election. And unfortunately, it was when we had our gubernatorial race that elected Governor Jared Polis. And after that is when we just saw this dramatic decline in Colorado. Our policies infringing on Coloradans' rights. And then just the crime increase. Marijuana, it's legal in Colorado, obviously. And I think that did bring in a different...
So you connect that directly? Because as a general rule, I'm more libertarian, and I do believe in legalizing this stuff, and I'm not against people doing what they want with their lives. But even seeing in New York what's going on right now, the whole city just smells like weed, basically.
Yes. Yeah. You can't go outside in Denver and not smell weed. And it's pretty much throughout most of the state, especially in those urban areas. But I think it just brought with it, that legalization brought with it a different population and certainly a transient population. And the homelessness has just skyrocketed in Denver.
So this video is absolutely amazing because while they do mention the very real problem that is homelessness in the United States, particularly in major cities, they say that the problem is that there's just too many Democrats, which is really, really funny because what ultimately is the Republican solution to homelessness? Republicans very continuously say things along the lines of like, oh, get a real job or personal responsibility. I mean, quite literally, Republicans, their whole strategy around homeless people is stripping away any type of benefit program and anything that could materially help homeless people, which is why, and I know this is wild, a lot of homeless people will choose to move towards places like cities that have Democratic representatives because there will be very limited but a small degree of some sort of services that they can potentially benefit from. But this does speak to like a larger problem because what actually is causing the homelessness? Well, the answer is relatively simple. We have plenty of homes across the United States of America, so it's not that there's a shortage of housing. Well, the simple fact is that landlords make more money by keeping some units empty and waiting for people to pay higher prices. It is more profitable for them to squeeze some people out of the housing market entirely in order to charge higher rent. And they can get away with this because the entire business model is really built around the idea of creating a barrier to entry. I mean, like quite literally, that's why things like housing prices go up year over year. It's not because magically all of the cost of building housing is just going up consistently. It's because as investors swoop in, they control larger parts of the market and thus just inflate the cost of housing artificially. And so that really is the real problem, which is why there still is homelessness problems within Democratic communities, because ultimately the Democratic Party is unwilling to address the fundamental contradiction in society that is the clash between tenants and landlords that is simply inherent to that economic relationship. Landlords will always want to extract as much wealth as possible from their tenants, which will lead to, under capitalism, inevitably skyrocketing rents and an increased cost of living, which will by definition, create homelessness. But no, instead of dealing with any of those problems, they just say, oh, it's the Democrats, they're too far to the left, they're legalizing things like marijuana, and that's what's causing all of the homelessness. It couldn't possibly be these wealthy real estate investors that are destroying the economy and making it impossible to afford to be able to live. And like, sure, Democrats are not doing enough to fundamentally address this problem within society because they don't want to do anything to upset real estate investors. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the idea that deregulation will somehow make the housing market better is just absolutely silly. On its face, it is completely absurd. You see, these right-wingers don't actually care about how many people are homeless. These right-wingers just do not want homeless people to be visible, which is why the right-wing tactic towards homeless people is to criminalize their presence in public in order to force them into hiding. Quite literally, their strategy is to use violence from the police in order to terrorize homeless people and force them to hide away from the public. That's it. That is the right-wing solution to homelessness, which I think we all should recognize is fundamentally evil. And the unfortunate reality is there are a lot of Democrats that employ effectively that same exact strategy as well. They will claim that there are plenty of shelters available, even though homeless shelters are A, not permanent housing, and B, fundamentally dangerous. It is quite literally very unsafe. And a lot of people who have been homeless for extended periods of time will tell you that they actively avoid going to shelters because of all the risks associated with it. And that's why homeless people tend to like to form camps together, because they can have some degree of community and safety in community, as opposed to having all of their autonomy stripped away by some random nonprofit organization that very often does not allow them to keep pets, personal belongings, or allow them to have private space or anything like that. So anybody that's telling you homeless shelters as a solution fundamentally has no idea what homelessness actually looks like in America. But throw all these things together, and what you basically see is two parties that are fundamentally doing a miserable job, with the Republicans obviously doing a far worse job. And that's another thing. A lot of these people will point to homelessness in the cities, and that is a major problem, but there are a lot of people in rural areas who are homeless as well. It's just, and I know this is wild, you are less likely to see them because people are literally just less likely to be walking around like in any downtown area. And so homelessness in rural areas is just far less visible, which is why there's this sort of like false notion that homelessness really only exists in the cities, when in actuality it is across our entire country. And the only real solution that will effectively deal with this problem is to fundamentally challenge the ability of real estate investors to completely define the housing market. Anything short of that will fundamentally fail to actually address the core issue.